When love, money, and power collide in the glittering city of Dubai, the consequences can be deadly, not just for those directly involved, but for the innocent lives caught in the crossfire. This is the story of Elena, a Filipina saleslady whose smile captivated one of Dubai's wealthiest businessmen, and the calculated act of vengeance that would rob her not just of her unborn child, but of the future she had sacrificed everything to build. Dubai Mall, United Arab Emirates. December 15, 2023. As the world's largest shopping center pulsed with holiday shoppers, 28-year-old Elena stood behind the gleaming counter of Maison de Perfume, a luxury fragrance boutique where bottles started at $300 and could reach upwards of $3,000. Her uniform, a tailored black dress with gold accents, was as precisely crafted as the scents she sold, designed to project an aura of elegance that customers would aspire to possess. Smile like your life depends on it, her manager had instructed during her first day of training. In luxury retail, your smile isn't just friendliness. It's part of the product. It tells the customer they're worthy of happiness. What her manager didn't articulate was the unspoken truth that Elena had learned through experience. For women like her, foreign workers from developing nations, their smiles often were exactly what their livelihoods depended on. Elena Villafuerte had not always been a purveyor of expensive fragrances to the ultra-wealthy. Born in Quezon City, Philippines, she had once been a promising psychology student at the University of the Philippines, her academic performance earning her a partial scholarship. Those dreams of becoming a clinical psychologist collapsed in her third year when her mother, Maricel, was diagnosed with stage 4 kidney disease, requiring dialysis 3 times weekly. She was brilliant, remembers Dr. Antonio Legaspi, her former psychology professor. Elena had this remarkable insight into human behavior. She could read people's needs before they expressed them. That gift would later become both her greatest asset and her greatest vulnerability. With her father long absent from their lives and no siblings to share the burden, Elena made the decision that thousands of Filipinos make every year. She sacrificed her future to preserve her family's present. She withdrew from university, worked briefly at a call center in Manila, then secured a position through Global Retail Placement, a boutique agency specializing in placing Filipino workers in luxury retail positions throughout the Middle East. We selected Elena immediately, recalls Maria Santos, the agency's talent coordinator. Beyond her English fluency and natural poise, she had that rare quality we call invisible service, the ability to make wealthy customers feel seen and catered to without ever feeling confronted by your own humanity. It's a specific skill set that luxury brands pay premium wages to acquire. Those premium wages, approximately $1,800 monthly plus commission, represented nearly 5 times what Elena could earn in Manila, enough to cover her mother's dialysis treatments, medications, and eventually secure a small apartment in Cebu where Maricel could receive better medical care. The cost, however, was Elena's physical presence in her mother's life during a critical illness, replaced by daily video calls and monthly remittances. The hardest part wasn't leaving, Elena told a fellow OFW, overseas Filipino worker, in a text exchange recovered later. It was knowing I was choosing money over being with her. But what choice did I have? Money equals medicine. Medicine equals more time together eventually. That's the equation no one tells you about when you're growing up. Dubai presented Elena with a world of stark contrasts. By day, she helped ultra-wealthy customers select fragrances costing more than her monthly rent. By night, she returned to a cramped studio apartment in Al Quoz that she shared with 2 other retail workers, their lives compressed into carefully delineated spaces separated by hanging curtains rather than walls. If this reality, the invisible workforce supporting luxury lifestyles, seems disturbing, take a moment to hit that like button. Your engagement helps us continue exposing these economic imbalances that create perfect environments for exploitation. Elena had been working at Maison de Perfume for approximately 8 months when she first encountered Karim Al-Rashid. At 42, he represented the epitome of Dubai's new elite, an Emirati real estate magnate whose portfolio of properties stretched from the Palm Jumeirah to emerging markets throughout Southeast Asia. His wealth, conservatively estimated at $400 million, placed him among the UAE's most eligible businessmen despite his married status. Karim wasn't just rich, explains financial journalist Fareed Al-Mansour. He possessed what many of his peers lacked, genuine charisma independent of his wealth. He spoke English, Arabic, and French fluently, remembered staff members' names at restaurants he visited only occasionally, and had a reputation for noticing the unnoticed, acknowledging service workers others treated as invisible. This quality, the ability to make people feel seen, would form the foundation of his connection with Elena, a woman professionally trained to disappear into the background of luxury retail environments. Their initial interaction seemed unremarkable. Karim entered Maison de Parfum seeking a gift for his business partner's wife. Elena guided him through several options, ultimately recommending a limited-edition sandalwood-based fragrance that complemented the recipient's usual preferences while offering something unique. "What struck me about your suggestion," he told her as she wrapped the purchase, "is that you didn't try to sell me the most expensive option. You actually listened to what I described. That's remarkably rare." This observation, so simple yet so penetrating, pierced the professional veneer Elena maintained. Someone had seen past her practiced smile to the intelligence directing her recommendations. Someone had noticed her as a person rather than a service function. What Elena couldn't know was that this recognition, this momentary validation, was a technique Karim had perfected in both business and personal conquests. The ability to make someone feel exceptional, to suggest they possess qualities others had missed, represented his most effective tool for both negotiations and seductions. The most dangerous predators aren't those who immediately push boundaries, explains forensic psychologist Dr. Amina Rashid. They're those who first recognize boundaries others have violated, who position themselves as the rare person who respects what everyone else ignores. This creates a powerful contrast that makes subsequent boundary violations seem like exceptions rather than patterns. Karim returned to the boutique 3 days later, ostensibly to thank Elena for her excellent recommendation. This time he lingered, asking her opinion on a fragrance for himself. Their conversation expanded beyond perfumes to Dubai's cultural offerings, the challenges of expatriate life, and eventually to their personal backgrounds. Before leaving, he purchased an $850 cologne he didn't need, ensuring his visit registered as productive business rather than personal interest. What followed was textbook gradual boundary erosion. First came seemingly accidental encounters, Karim appearing at the cafe where Elena took lunch breaks, expressing surprised delight at the coincidence. Then text messages asking professional advice about fragrance gifts for various business associates. Eventually, dinner at a rooftop restaurant in DIFC, framed as gratitude for her retail guidance but unmistakably personal in its execution. "I've never met someone who listens the way you do," he told her over candlelight, the Dubai skyline glittering beyond their private terrace. "Everyone in my world wants something from me: business advantages, social connections, financial opportunities. You're the only one who sees me as a man, not a brand." This declaration, positioning their connection as uniquely authentic amid transactional relationships, represented a masterful inversion of their actual power dynamic. In reality, Karim possessed all structural advantages: citizenship, wealth, gender, social standing. Yet his narrative reframed Elena as the one with power, the power to see his authentic self, to offer genuine connection in his supposedly isolated existence. This reversal of vulnerability is particularly effective with empathetic individuals, notes relationship psychologist Dr. Sarah Chun. It transforms the materially powerful person into the emotionally vulnerable one, activating caregiving instincts in targets who often have professional training in emotional support roles. For Elena, whose psychology background had developed her natural empathy into professional insight, this appeal proved particularly resonant. The relationship progressed rapidly from that first dinner in February 2024. Weekend trips to Abu Dhabi under fabricated names. Hotel suites booked through shell companies. Intimate dinners in private dining rooms where staff signed non-disclosure agreements. A parallel reality constructed entirely around protected secrecy. "I know this can't last forever," Elena wrote in a journal entry dated April 2024. "I'm not naive enough to believe he'll leave his wife for the perfume girl from Quezon City. But for now, being truly seen feels like enough. After years of being invisible, even temporary recognition feels revolutionary. This entry reveals Elena's initial clear-eyed assessment of their relationship: recognition without expectation, connection without delusion about potential outcomes. What she couldn't anticipate was how pregnancy would transform this emotional calculus entirely. By May 2024, Elena had begun experiencing morning sickness. A home test confirmed what her body had already signaled. She was approximately 6 weeks pregnant. The news represented both personal upheaval and professional catastrophe. Her work visa explicitly prohibited pregnancy outside marriage. Discovery would mean immediate deportation without benefits or references. Her housing contract with roommates prohibited overnight guests, making childcare logistically impossible. Her financial responsibilities to her mother left no margin for additional dependence. The precarity of her situation cannot be overstated, explains migrant workers' rights advocate Layla Rahman. For expatriate workers from developing nations, pregnancy outside marriage represents not just moral judgment but comprehensive systemic collapse, immediate loss of income, housing, healthcare access, and legal residency simultaneously. Elena didn't immediately inform Karim. She weighed options, researched alternatives, calculated financial scenarios. Her psychology training had taught her that life-changing news delivered at the wrong moment could trigger defensive rather than supportive responses. She would wait for the optimal moment, when Karim felt most connected, most emotionally accessible. What Elena didn't realize as she carefully planned this revelation was that she had already been noticed by someone else. Someone whose trained eye for financial discrepancies had transferred seamlessly to detecting personal betrayal. Someone whose methodical approach to problem-solving would transform Elena's calculated risk into catastrophic consequence. Layla al-Rashid, Karim's wife of 15 years, had not built her reputation on impulsive reactions. A former forensic accountant for one of the Gulf's largest banking institutions, she had pivoted her analytical skills to philanthropic oversight, serving on boards for women's education initiatives throughout the Middle East. Her public persona projected elegant restraint and strategic thinking, qualities that made her both a valued business partner and a devastatingly effective enemy. If you're sensing the gathering storm around Elena, hit that subscribe button and notification bell. What happens when a woman trained to detect financial fraud applies those same skills to uncovering personal betrayal? Stay with us as we continue unraveling the chilling case of the price of a smile. The first indication that Layla had registered Elena's existence came in late May 2024. Without announcement or apparent purpose, she appeared at Maison de Parfum during Elena's afternoon shift, dressed in a simple but impeccably tailored navy suit, her hijab arranged with geometric precision. Layla browsed fragrance collections with the focused attention of someone who evaluates before purchasing. When Elena approached to offer assistance, standard protocol for customers who lingered beyond 3 minutes, Layla engaged her with polite but penetrating attention. "I'm looking for something distinctive," she explained, her English perfect and unaccented. "Not what everyone else wears. I find most popular fragrances predictable." Elena guided her through several niche collections, eventually recommending Baccarat Rouge, an unusual composition with notes of saffron, jasmine, and cedar that changed character with body chemistry. As she wrapped the $350 bottle, Layla studied her with unsettling directness. "Do you ever get tired?" she asked suddenly. "Pardon me, madam?" "Tired of smiling," Layla clarified, her own expression pleasantly neutral. "It must exhaust the facial muscles eventually." The question, so unexpected, so precisely targeted at the performance aspect of Elena's role, momentarily cracked her professional composure. "It's part of the job, madam," she responded carefully, the practiced smile returning to her face. Layla nodded, accepting the packaged perfume with a smile of her own. Not the warm expression of customer satisfaction, but something colder, more assessing. An acknowledgement between two women recognizing a battle line neither had officially drawn. "I'm sure it is," she replied. "Thank you for your authentic service." As Layla departed, Elena felt an inexplicable chill despite the mall's carefully controlled climate. Only later would she understand this seemingly random encounter as reconnaissance, the opening move in a calculated endgame that had already begun. June 2024. As Elena entered her second trimester, the relationship with Karim intensified in both emotional intimacy and material support. No longer content with hotel rendezvous and weekend escapes, he secured a one-bedroom apartment for her in Jumeirah Lakes Towers, a mid-luxury development far enough from his social circles to ensure privacy yet significantly more comfortable than her shared accommodations in Al-Quoz. "For your safety," he explained, presenting her with the electronic key card. "You shouldn't be sharing space with strangers in your condition. This place is yours for as long as you need it." The apartment, though modest by Karim's standards, represented unprecedented luxury for Elena. Approximately 750 square feet with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking artificial lakes. Fully furnished with designer pieces selected by Karim's personal interior decorator. Stocked with high-end groceries and prenatal vitamins. A doorman provided security, a weekly cleaning service maintained the space, and the location offered walking distance to a medical clinic specializing in expatriate healthcare. When a wealthy person begins providing material necessities to someone vulnerable, it's never purely generosity, explains financial abuse counselor Dr. Jasmine Corey. It creates dependency while establishing evidence of care that can later be leveraged. "After everything I've done for you," becomes a powerful silencing tool when problems arise. This silencing dynamic would eventually become crucial to Elena's story. But in those early summer months, the apartment represented something she had never experienced in Dubai. Space that belonged exclusively to her, where she could exist without performance or compression, where her pregnancy could progress without concealment or explanation. The revelation of her pregnancy to Karim had unfolded differently than Elena anticipated. Rather than shock or denial, he displayed a complex reaction blending concern, possessiveness, and something resembling genuine joy or emotions she hadn't dared expect from a married man facing potential scandal. "This changes everything," he'd said, hands trembling slightly as they rested on her still flat abdomen. "But not in the way you might fear. This is a sign, a reason to finally make the changes I've been considering." Over subsequent weeks, these changes crystallized into increasingly specific promises. Divorce proceedings after his wife's charitable board term concluded in December to avoid embarrassing her professionally. A private villa in Dubai Hills estate where Elena and the baby would live during the transitional period. Eventually, marriage and family reunification, including bringing her mother from the Philippines for medical treatment in Dubai's world-class facilities. "When Layla's charity board term ends, I'll file for divorce," he promised during a late-night conversation in her new apartment. "You and the baby will be my real family, the one I choose rather than the one arranged for business advantages." For viewers wondering how an educated woman could believe such promises, remember that conviction rarely stems from naivety but from necessity. Hit that like button if you recognize how limited options can make even calculated risks seem reasonable when survival is at stake. "I didn't fully believe him," Elena later confided to a Filipino nurse who briefly cared for her after the poisoning. "But my visa was tied to my job. My pregnancy would soon show. Deportation meant returning to poverty, to watching my mother die without adequate medical care. When you have no good choices, you select the least destructive possibility and construct hope around it." This pragmatic assessment, choosing Karim's potentially false promises over guaranteed catastrophe, reflected not romantic delusion but rational risk calculation given her constrained options. The UAE's kafala sponsorship system, which ties worker visas directly to employers, creates precisely this vulnerability by eliminating alternative pathways when employment becomes untenable. What Elena couldn't know was that while she constructed contingency plans around Karim's promises, Layla al-Rashid had already launched a comprehensive investigation into their relationship, applying the same methodical analysis that had once uncovered multimillion-dollar financial fraud schemes. Unlike the dramatic confrontations portrayed in fiction, Layla's approach reflected her professional training. Systematic, evidence-based, and focused on identifying vulnerabilities rather than making accusations. Her investigation unfolded along multiple tracks simultaneously. First, financial surveillance. As co-signatory on all family accounts, Layla had access to Kareem's banking records. She identified unusual patterns. Cash withdrawals of exactly $5,000 on the first of each month since March. A wire transfer of $47,000 to a private medical facility in Cebu, Philippines. The purchase of the Jumeirah Lakes Towers apartment through a shell company typically used for commercial rather than residential acquisitions. Second, digital tracking. Without directly accessing his personal devices, which would alert him to her suspicions, Layla utilized their shared cloud storage and family account permissions to review his location history, hotel bookings, and rideshare receipts. This revealed regular weekend trips to Abu Dhabi's Emirates Palace Hotel under the reservation name Khalid Ibrahim, a pseudonym Kareem had previously used for discreet business negotiations. Third, personal reconnaissance. Rather than hiring private investigators who might be recognized or bribed by Kareem's security team, Layla conducted direct observation using techniques that leveraged her perceived invisibility as a conservatively dressed Arab woman. She personally verified Elena's workplace, documented their meeting patterns, and most critically, identified the apartment in Jumeirah Lakes Towers through carefully timed observation from a friend's nearby residence. The methodical nature of Layla's investigation indicates this wasn't crime of passion but strategic response, notes criminal psychologist Dr. Farid Al-Jabri. Rather than confront her husband at the first sign of infidelity, which might allow him to manipulate the narrative, she built a comprehensive understanding of the situation before determining her response. This patience is what made her ultimate action so devastating. By July 2024, Layla had compiled a complete profile of her husband's relationship with Elena, including medical records confirming the pregnancy. Rather than emotional distress, her journals from this period, later discovered during the poisoning investigation, reveal clinical assessment of options and consequences. Divorce is financially feasible but socially damaging. Family would support me, but business partnerships might align with him given gender bias in the industry. The child complicates matters, potential heir, legal claims, permanent connection. Clean separation impossible with ongoing biological link. This entry, dated July 23, 2024, represents the pivot point where Layla's thinking transformed from documentation to action, from gathering evidence to formulating response. The clinical language, clean separation, biological link, foreshadows her eventual approach to Elena, not as romantic rival but as problem requiring elimination. Throughout August and September, while Elena's pregnancy progressed and Kareem's promises expanded, Layla focused on a single critical question: how to remove the threat while maintaining her position and reputation. Direct confrontation with Kareem would create unpredictable outcomes and potential public scandal. Legal action against Elena would generate documents and proceedings that might reach media attention. Physical violence through hired intermediaries carried excessive risk of detection. The solution, when it emerged, reflected Layla's analytical background. Identifying a method that would appear natural, generate minimal investigation, create no connection to herself, yet effectively eliminate both the pregnancy and potentially Elena herself. Through a distant family connection working in pharmaceutical research, Layla secured a consultation with a toxicologist who had previously advised on food safety protocols for her charitable foundation's feeding programs. Under the pretext of discussing contamination risks in rural water supplies, she extracted critical information about substances that could induce miscarriage while potentially causing cardiac complications. Specifically, aconite, a plant-derived toxin that occurs naturally in certain traditional medicines. Aconite is particularly insidious, explains forensic toxicologist Dr. Samira Nader. In moderate doses, it causes gastrointestinal distress, cardiac arrhythmia, and potential miscarriage in pregnant women. In severe cases, it can cause fatal heart failure. Critically, it metabolizes quickly and can be easily mistaken for natural heart complications or severe food poisoning unless specifically tested for, which rarely happens in standard toxicology screens. Through a complex series of intermediaries, shell companies, and cash transactions, Layla procured a purified aconite extract from an unregulated pharmaceutical supplier in Pakistan. The substance arrived in late October 2024, a clear liquid in an unmarked eyedropper bottle, powerful enough that 3 drops could induce severe symptoms while remaining virtually undetectable in strongly flavored beverages. Simultaneously, Layla conducted detailed surveillance of Elena's daily routines, identifying a critical vulnerability. Every Friday after her shift ended at 4 p.m., Elena purchased a mango passionfruit smoothie from Tropical Oasis, a small cafe approximately 100 meters from the mall's service entrance. She typically consumed this while waiting for her transportation, sitting alone at an outside table for approximately 15 minutes. This routine, so mundane, so ordinary, would become the vector for a calculated act of violence that would destroy not just a pregnancy but fundamentally alter multiple lives forever. If you're invested in discovering exactly how Layla executed her plan and its devastating consequences for everyone involved, hit that notification bell right now. In our next segment, we'll reveal the meticulous execution of the poisoning, the medical crisis that followed, and the ruthless leverage of power that would ultimately silence a victim before she could seek justice. The true crime here isn't just the act of poisoning. It's the systems that enable wealthy perpetrators to purchase silence and reshape narratives through financial coercion. Stay with us as The Price of a Smile continues to unravel the dark reality behind Dubai's glittering facade. November 8, 2024. A Friday like any other in Dubai Mall. The pre-holiday shopping season had begun, bringing increased foot traffic and the associated pressure on retail staff to maintain perfect composure despite longer hours and more demanding customers. Elena had completed a 9-hour shift at Maison de Parfum, her pregnancy now visibly apparent at 18 weeks, despite the carefully tailored uniform designed to minimize her changing silhouette. The day had been particularly demanding. A visiting Saudi princess and her entourage had spent nearly 2 hours selecting fragrances for an upcoming wedding, requiring Elena to remain standing without breaks, while maintaining the perfect balance of deference and expertise expected in luxury service. By 4:15 p.m., as she signed out of her register and prepared to leave through the service entrance, her lower back ached and her ankles had swollen noticeably in the black pumps required by dress code. "You look exhausted," observed her colleague Sophia, a Lebanese woman who had recently joined the boutique staff. "Go home and rest. I'll finish the inventory count. Just need my Friday smoothie first," Elena replied with a tired smile. "The baby's been craving mango all day." This casual reference, the personification of her unborn child, the ritual of the weekly treat, would take on devastating significance in the hours that followed. The small pleasures that punctuated Elena's carefully structured life had become predictable enough to create vulnerability, her routines mapped and weaponized by someone who understood that patterns create perfect opportunities. Layla Al-Rashid had been preparing for this specific Friday for weeks. Her appearance that afternoon was meticulously designed for both effectiveness and anonymity. A Western-style business suit rather than traditional Emirati dress, hair covered by a fashionable headscarf that read as cultural choice rather than religious observance, oversized sunglasses obscuring her distinctive eyes, subtle makeup altering the appearance of her cheekbones and lip shape. At 4:05 p.m., she positioned herself at a table near Tropical Oasis, the small cafe where Elena purchased her weekly smoothie. She ordered sparkling water and a small salad, establishing herself as a legitimate customer with a reason to linger. The cafe was busy but not crowded, creating the perfect balance between witnesses who would remember an ordinary businesswoman having a late lunch and the relative privacy needed for her intended action. "The timing had to be perfect," explains criminal behavioral analyst Dr. Tariq Rahman. "Too empty and she risked direct observation. Too crowded and she risked someone noticing the specific act of tampering. She needed just enough ambient activity to create distraction without creating barriers to execution." At 4:22 p.m., Elena arrived at the cafe, her movements slower than usual due to fatigue and pregnancy. She placed her regular order mango passionfruit smoothie with added protein and moved to the pickup counter, scrolling through her phone while waiting. The preparation took approximately 3 minutes, during which the smoothie cup sat momentarily unattended as the barista turned to operate the blender. This momentary window, less than 20 seconds of vulnerability, was all Layla needed. With the practiced movements of someone who had rehearsed precisely this sequence, she approached the counter as if to request a napkin, her body blocking security camera views of her hands. In one fluid motion, She removed the eyedropper bottle from her purse, released 3 drops of clear liquid into Elena's smoothie cup, and returned to her table, the entire sequence requiring less than 5 seconds. When the barista turned back, nothing appeared amiss. When Elena collected her drink, she noticed nothing unusual about its appearance or initial taste. When she sat at her usual outside table to enjoy a moment of rest before her commute home, she had no way of knowing that each sip contained aconite, a cardiotoxin with specific properties that made it uniquely dangerous to her pregnant body. Aconite works gradually, explains toxicologist Dr. Nadia Mahmood. Initial symptoms can take 20 minutes to an hour to manifest, depending on concentration and individual metabolism. It begins with tingling in the mouth and face, followed by nausea, then progresses to cardiovascular symptoms including arrhythmia and potentially heart failure. In pregnant women, it causes uterine contractions due to its effect on smooth muscle tissue. Elena finished approximately 3/4 of her smoothie before checking the time and disposing of the remainder in a nearby trash receptacle. She then proceeded to the taxi stand where she typically caught a ride back to her apartment in Jumeirah Lakes Towers. Security footage later recovered shows her walking normally at 4:37 p.m., showing no immediate signs of distress. The first symptoms began during her taxi ride home. What started as slight tingling in her lips progressed rapidly to dizziness and nausea, which she initially attributed to pregnancy-related motion sickness. By the time the taxi reached her building at 5:05 p.m., she was experiencing difficulty breathing and irregular heartbeat, symptoms severe enough that she asked the building's security guard for assistance, reaching her apartment. She was very pale, holding her chest, recalled Rajiv Patel, the security guard who helped her from the taxi to the elevator. She said she needed to lie down, that maybe it was just the baby pressing on something. I offered to call an ambulance, but she said she would rest first. This decision, to attempt rest rather than seek immediate medical attention, nearly proved fatal. Within 20 minutes of reaching her apartment, Elena collapsed in her bathroom, managing only to call Kareem before losing consciousness. The call, logged at 5:28 p.m., lasted just 47 seconds. Enough time for her to gasp out that something was terribly wrong before the phone clattered to the floor. If you've ever wondered how quickly a medical emergency can escalate from discomfort to life-threatening crisis, hit that like button. Elena's experience demonstrates the critical importance of seeking immediate care when experiencing sudden, unusual symptoms, particularly during pregnancy. Kareem's response to Elena's call showed uncharacteristic urgency that would later raise questions during the police investigation. Rather than contacting emergency services, he dispatched his personal driver directly to her apartment with instructions to bring her to American Hospital Dubai, a private facility where his family maintained relationships with senior medical staff. He simultaneously contacted Dr. Omar Bashir, a cardiologist who had previously treated his father, requesting immediate availability. This sequence of decisions, prioritizing private care over faster emergency response, establishing a direct line to specialists before diagnosis, ensuring transport that limited public visibility, revealed the complex calculation occurring even in crisis, protecting Elena's health while maintaining secrecy about their relationship. By the time Elena arrived at American Hospital Dubai at 6:12 p.m., she was experiencing severe cardiac arrhythmia, respiratory distress, and the beginning of uterine contractions. The medical team, alerted by Dr. Bashir's advance call, immediately recognized the dual emergency: a pregnant patient in cardiovascular crisis who was simultaneously showing signs of imminent miscarriage. When she arrived, we faced competing priorities, Dr. Bashir later testified to investigators. Her cardiac function was deteriorating rapidly. Initial assessment showed ventricular tachycardia with periods of fibrillation requiring immediate intervention. Simultaneously, fetal monitors showed distress and the beginning of placental separation. We had to stabilize her heart before addressing the pregnancy. The medical team's intervention likely saved Elena's life. Emergency cardiac medication restored temporary rhythm stability, oxygen supplementation addressed the respiratory crisis, and intensive monitoring allowed for moment-by-moment adjustment of treatment protocols. However, these life-saving interventions came at a devastating cost. The medications necessary to stabilize Elena's heart were incompatible with pregnancy maintenance. At 8:37 p.m., approximately 4 hours after consuming the poison smoothie, Elena suffered a complete miscarriage, her body's response to both the direct effects of aconite on uterine muscle and the secondary impact of compromised blood flow to the placenta. The fetus, determined to be a male at 18 weeks development, showed no signs of viability after delivery. Karim arrived at the hospital during this critical period, his panic appearing genuine to medical staff who had no knowledge of the complex circumstances. Hospital security footage captured him pacing the private waiting room, repeatedly attempting to enter treatment areas, and at one point collapsing into a chair with his head in his hands, behavior consistent with genuine distress rather than performance. When finally allowed to see Elena at approximately 10:30 p.m., after her condition had stabilized enough to permit visitors, witnesses described a scene of raw emotional intensity rarely displayed by men of his cultural background and social position. He held her hand and wept openly, recalled nurse Fatima Al-Zahir, who was present during the visit. He kept saying, "I'll leave her, I swear. This ends now." At the time, I assumed he meant leaving his wife, though he never said that specifically. This statement, recorded in hospital logs as part of standard documentation of family interactions, would later become critical evidence in the police investigation. The ambiguity of "I'll leave her" created interpretive space that Layla would exploit masterfully in the next phase of her plan. While Elena fought for her life in intensive care, Layla executed the second component of her strategy with clinical precision. Using access to Karim's home office during his hospital vigil, she planted two critical pieces of evidence: his fingerprints on the disposed smoothie cup, retrieved from the mall trash receptacle and carefully preserved in a sealed container, and a fabricated encrypted message in a secure messaging application he frequently used for sensitive business communications. The message, seemingly sent from Karim to an unnamed associate, contained the damning text, "Handle Elena quietly. No loose ends." Backdated to appear as if sent 3 days before the poisoning, it created the impression of premeditated intent rather than opportunistic action. By November 10th, as Elena's condition stabilized enough for preliminary questioning by hospital staff, Dubai police had been notified of a suspicious poisoning per standard protocol for unexplained medical emergencies. The investigation, initially routine, gained momentum when toxicology screens specifically requested by Dr. Bashir detected aconite in Elena's blood, a substance rarely encountered outside deliberate poisoning cases. "Aconite isn't something that appears accidentally," explained Detective Saeed Al-Mansouri, who led the initial investigation. "It's not a food contaminant or environmental toxin common in the UAE. Its presence immediately transformed this from a medical emergency to a potential attempted homicide." The investigation quickly identified 3 primary persons of interest: Elena herself, as potential self-harm case; Karim, as domestic partner with unclear motives; and initially unspecified business associates who might target Elena to pressure Karim. Notably absent from this list was Layla, her connection to Elena remaining unknown to investigators in the early stages due to the carefully compartmentalized nature of the affair. As police began standard evidence collection, interviewing hospital staff and securing Elena's apartment, a seemingly unrelated visitor arrived at American Hospital Dubai on November 11th. A woman identifying herself only as a family mediator representing interests concerned about Elena's welfare. This individual, later confirmed as attorney Noor Al-Jabri, a lawyer frequently retained by the Al-Rashid family for discreet matters, requested private access to Elena's room citing sensitive family discussions regarding the patient's future care. This visit, occurring while Elena remained heavily medicated, physically weakened, and emotionally devastated by the loss of her pregnancy, would initiate the next phase of Layla's strategy, transforming a failed murder attempt into a transaction of silence with terms favorable to everyone except the victim. If you're disturbed by how vulnerability can be exploited even in moments of greatest trauma, stay with us. In our next segment, we'll reveal exactly how Elena's suffering was commodified into a precise financial arrangement designed to purchase her silence and erase all evidence of the crime committed against her. Hit that subscribe button to ensure you don't miss the conclusion of this chilling case. November 11th, 2024. 3:17 p.m. Elena Villafuerte lay in a private room at American Hospital Dubai. still connected to cardiac monitors and intravenous medication. Less than 72 hours had passed since the poisoning that had nearly claimed her life and had successfully terminated her pregnancy. Her physical recovery had begun, heart rhythm stabilized, respiratory function improving, but the psychological trauma remained raw, unprocessed, a wound deeper than any toxin could inflict. Into this vulnerable space entered attorney Noor Al-Jabri, a woman whose elegantly professional appearance belied her function as enforcer of powerful interests. Though she introduced herself as a family mediator, her actual role was considerably more complex. Specialized legal counsel retained by the Al-Rashid family specifically for situations requiring discretion, deniability, and ruthless efficiency in problem resolution. Ms. Villafuerte, she began, her voice modulated to project both authority and compassion. I understand you've experienced a terrible tragedy. I'm here to discuss how we move forward from this unfortunate situation. The framing was masterful in its distortion, characterizing attempted murder as an unfortunate situation, positioning the representative of the likely perpetrator as facilitator of moving forward. This linguistic reframing exemplifies how power restructures reality itself, transforming crime into inconvenience through careful selection of terminology. What we're witnessing here is classic victim manipulation through crisis exploitation, explains victimology expert Dr. Maya Srinivasan. Approaching someone in a physically weakened, emotionally devastated state to negotiate terms favorable to the perpetrator is a deliberate strategy that exploits trauma-induced compliance. The victim's decision-making capacity is compromised precisely when life-altering choices are presented. For the next 47 minutes, as documented in hospital visitor logs, attorney Al-Jabri presented Elena with what was framed as an opportunity rather than coercion. A comprehensive resolution package that would provide financial security in exchange for her permanent silence regarding the circumstances of her poisoning and her relationship with Karim al-Rashid. The terms were meticulously structured to appear generous while serving primarily as evidence elimination. First, substantial material compensation. A fully paid villa in Davao City, Philippines, a property valued at approximately $380,000, located in an upscale gated community with security services and property management included for 5 years. Second, financial provision. $150,000 deposited directly to a newly established account at Philippine National Bank, structured as an irrevocable trust that would provide regular income while limiting large withdrawals that might trigger scrutiny. Third, medical continuation. Comprehensive coverage for her ongoing cardiac care through a private insurance policy, including quarterly evaluations for 2 years to monitor for long-term effects of the poisoning. Fourth, relocation assistance. A one-way business class ticket to Manila, expedited passport processing despite her current medical condition, and a private medical transport service for the journey. These apparent benefits came with explicit conditions outlined in a non-disclosure agreement spanning 27 pages of precise legal language. Any public or private statement regarding Karim al-Rashid, his family members, or the circumstances of the medical emergency experienced on November 8, 2024, will result in immediate termination of all benefits and trigger defamation proceedings in both UAE and Philippine jurisdictions. Recipient agrees to permanent non-contact with any member of the Al-Rashid family or their business associates, including digital communication, physical proximity, or communication through intermediaries. Recipient acknowledges that acceptance of these terms constitutes full and final resolution of all potential claims, legal or otherwise, related to events of November 8, 2024, and permanently waives right to pursue any future action related to said events. The document further required Elena to sign a separate statement attributing her medical emergency to an undiagnosed heart condition exacerbated by pregnancy, language crafted to redirect any subsequent medical investigation away from poisoning as cause. This wasn't a settlement, it was erasure by contract, notes legal ethicist Dr. James Morrison. Every provision served not to compensate the victim but to eliminate evidence, prevent testimony, and construct an alternative narrative that protected the perpetrator. The financial components weren't restitution but rather the purchase price of Elena's experience, buying the reality itself. Most chillingly, attorney Al-Jabri concluded her presentation with a statement that transformed the opportunity into unmistakable threat. Sign this NDA. Accept the villa in Davao. Never contact Kareem again, or the next dose won't miss. This explicit connection between the poisoning and the settlement offer, delivered by a representative with direct ties to the Al-Rashid family, constituted the only direct evidence linking Layla to the attempt on Elena's life. Yet it was evidence that existed solely in the memory of a traumatized victim with no recording, no witnesses, and no documentation beyond the settlement papers themselves. If you're horrified by how vulnerability can be weaponized against victims when they're at their weakest, hit that like button. Your engagement helps us continue exposing these power dynamics that transform criminal accountability into negotiable transactions. Elena's decision was made under conditions no person should face. Physically weakened by poison and miscarriage, emotionally devastated by loss, financially precarious due to pregnancy-compromised employment, and explicitly threatened with a next dose should she refuse. On November 12, 2024, her signature appeared on all 27 pages of the agreement, her hand visibly trembling on the final page, creating a signature notably different from her standard handwriting. "I had no choice," she later told a Filipino nurse who attended her during her final days at the hospital. "My mother needs her treatments. I have no job now. I have no baby. I have nothing but what they're giving me. And if I refuse, they'll finish what they started." Within the framework of trauma-informed justice, Elena's decision represents not complicity but survival, choosing continued existence over principled resistance when those options are artificially positioned as mutually exclusive by those with power to enforce such false dichotomies. The aftermath unfolded with the efficiency that wealth facilitates. On November 18th, after medical stability was confirmed, Elena was discharged directly to a private medical transport service that conveyed her to Al Maktoum International Airport. Her few possessions from the Jumeirah Lakes Towers apartment had been packed and shipped separately, after careful inventory and removal of anything potentially connecting her to Kareem or documenting her poisoning. She departed Dubai on Emirates flight EK334 to Manila, business class section, registered under her legal name but segregated from general passenger manifest through VIP processing that limited her interaction with standard immigration procedures. By November 19th, she had arrived in the Philippines, officially recorded as a routine return of an overseas worker, with no flag in the system indicating the circumstances of her departure. Meanwhile, in Dubai, the police investigation into her poisoning collapsed with methodical precision. Kareem Al-Rashid, initially considered a person of interest due to his connection to Elena and his documented presence at the hospital, was cleared through a combination of strategic evidence manipulation and the significant influence his family wielded within Dubai's judicial system. The case met every criteria for professional disruption, explains former prosecutor Fatima Al-Hosani. Key evidence disappeared. The smoothie cup could not be located. Hospital records were amended to indicate natural causes. Witnesses suddenly became unavailable or changed statements. Most critically, the victim herself, the central witness, had left the jurisdiction and apparently withdrawn any complaint. On December 2, 2024, Dubai police officially classified the case as resolved without prosecution, insufficient evidence of criminal activity. The medical records were sealed under privacy protocols, and all investigative materials were archived in restricted access files typically reserved for sensitive cases involving prominent families. The public narrative that emerged bore no resemblance to actual events. Through carefully placed items in Dubai's social publications, Layla orchestrated what appeared to be a redemption story. The Al-Rashids making a generous donation of 2 million dirhams, approximately $545,000, to American Hospital Dubai for cardiac care for foreign workers in honor of a valued employee who experienced a health crisis while supporting our community. This performative philanthropy, using a fraction of their wealth to create positive publicity directly connected to their victim, represents perhaps the most perverse aspect of how power not only evades consequences but converts its own wrongdoing into social capital. The donation wasn't despite the crime, it was because of it, notes public relations analyst Sophie Chin. It transformed attempted murder into an opportunity for public benevolence, creating a narrative where the perpetrators appear as saviors rather than criminals. It's reputation laundering using the very incident that should have damaged their standing. By January 2025, the Al-Rashids had successfully weathered what might have been a devastating scandal. They appeared together at Dubai's annual charity gala, photographed holding hands and sharing what society pages described as intimate glances that suggest the couple has found renewed connection. Layla, resplendent in designer evening wear, accepted an award for her foundation's work supporting women's education, her speech emphasizing the strength women find in overcoming life's unexpected challenges. For those with wealth and power, even attempted murder could be repackaged as a growth opportunity, a bump in the marital road, a challenge overcome through renewed commitment. The media narrative positioned them as Dubai's power couple reborn, stronger and more united after weathering unspecified personal challenges in recent months. In the Philippines, Elena's reality could not have contrasted more sharply with this polished fiction. She arrived in Davao City in late November 2024, physically weakened and psychologically traumatized. The villa provided through the settlement offered material comfort but no emotional healing, its luxury spaces becoming a gilded cage where she recovered in isolation, unable to share the true circumstances of her return with even her closest family. "I told my mother the baby wasn't viable," she confided to Maria Santos, a former colleague who visited her in early 2025. "That's all I can say without violating the agreement. That my body rejected it. That sometimes these things happen." This partial truth, framing deliberate poisoning as natural miscarriage, represented the beginning of Elena's forced complicity in her own silencing. The settlement hadn't merely purchased her legal silence. It had compelled her participation in constructing and maintaining the false narrative that protected her attackers. Despite these constraints, Elena created one small act of resistance. A locked drawer in her bedroom containing 2 items, the ultrasound photograph from her 16-week prenatal appointment and a small vial containing residue from the smoothie she had partially preserved before discarding. These physical artifacts, meaningless as evidence without her testimony to contextualize them, nonetheless represented her private refusal to completely surrender reality to those who had attempted to murder her and then purchased her silence. Private truth-keeping is a common survival mechanism for victims prevented from seeking public justice, explains trauma psychologist Dr. Anna Rivera. Creating a physical repository of evidence, even evidence that can never be used, maintains connection to reality when external forces attempt to rewrite it. It's not about future prosecution. It's about present sanity. By spring 2025, Elena had established a fragile new normal. Using a portion of her settlement funds, she opened a small boutique perfume shop in Davao City, Sense of Home, specializing in fragrances incorporating Filipino botanical elements. The business provided structure, purpose, and legitimate explanation for her sudden financial improvement without requiring disclosure of its true source. Yet psychological healing proved more elusive than material stability. The trauma manifested in subtle but persistent symptoms: flinching when customers smiled too broadly, panic attacks triggered by mango scent, inability to consume beverages she hadn't prepared herself, hypervigilance in public spaces, and recurrent nightmares about pregnancy and loss. What appears to outside observers as successful recovery, financial security, business ownership, physical health often masks profound invisible wounds, notes victimologist Dr. Ramona Santos. Elena survived the poisoning but lives with its effects every day. The chemical assault on her body, the loss of her child, the coerced silence about her own experience, and the knowledge that those responsible not only escaped consequences but prospered from her suffering. If you're realizing how justice becomes a luxury accessible primarily to those with resources to pursue it, stay with us. In our final segments, we'll explore how Elena's story eventually found alternative pathways to truth, not through courts that favored the powerful, but through the unexpected courage of witnesses who refused to remain silent. Hit that subscribe button to receive notification when we release the conclusion to The Price of a Smile. For victims like Elena, conventional justice remains elusive when wealth and influence can transform crimes into transactions, purchasing silence with the very resources that should make perpetrators more rather than less accountable. Yet, as we'll discover, even the most carefully constructed silences sometimes find their voice, often in ways their purchasers never anticipated. June 15, 2025. A bustling outdoor market in downtown Davao City, Philippines. Elena Villafuerte moved carefully between stalls, selecting fresh flowers for her boutique perfume shop. At 29, she had established a precarious normality in the 7 months since the poisoning that had nearly claimed her life and had successfully terminated her pregnancy. Her business, while modest, had begun developing a loyal clientele who appreciated her meticulously crafted scents inspired by Filipino botanical traditions. On this ordinary morning, as she examined sampaguita blossoms from a local grower, she had no reason to believe her carefully constructed silence was about to fracture. "Excuse me, ma'am? Is it Elena?" She turned to find a young Filipino man regarding her with hesitant recognition. His face registered vaguely familiar, though she couldn't immediately place him. "I'm Daniel. I used to work at Tropical Oasis in Dubai Mall. I made your mango passion fruit smoothie every Friday." He smiled tentatively, clearly pleased to encounter a familiar face from his overseas employment. The mention of that specific beverage triggered an immediate physiological response in Elena: elevated heart rate, constricted breathing, cold sweat forming despite the tropical heat. The smoothie that had carried the poison, that had killed her child, that had nearly stopped her heart permanently. "I think you're mistaking me for someone else," she managed, her voice steady despite the panic rising within her. But Daniel continued, his words shattering the carefully maintained boundary between her Dubai past and Philippine present. "I remember you. You were always so kind, the only customer who asked my name. You worked at that fancy perfume shop." His expression darkened slightly. "I left right after... well, after what happened to you." "After what happened to me?" Elena echoed, her tone deliberately neutral despite the alarm bells ringing in her mind. "The day you got sick. I never told anyone this." He lowered his voice, glancing around the busy market. "I saw the woman who tampered with your drink. She looked like Kareem Al-Rashid's wife. I recognized her from Society magazine photos. She did something to your smoothie when Raj turned to get more mango puree." This moment, this casual revelation from an unexpected witness, represented the first external confirmation of what Elena had experienced. For 7 months, the poisoning had existed solely in her own memory, deliberately isolated from verification by the terms of her silence agreement. Now, suddenly, another person was acknowledging the reality she had been contractually forbidden from speaking aloud. "Why didn't you say something then?" she asked, her voice barely audible above the market's bustle. Daniel's expression reflected the familiar calculation of precarious workers worldwide, weighing moral obligation against survival necessity. "My visa was expiring. I needed the reference letter to get my next position. By the time I heard you'd left the country, it seemed too late. I'm so sorry." This encounter, lasting barely 5 minutes in a busy market, would initiate a slow unraveling of the carefully constructed silence surrounding Elena's poisoning. Though she maintained her denial, insisting Daniel had confused her with someone else, the seed had been planted. Her reality, previously contained entirely within her own memory, had found external validation. The psychological impact of validation after enforced silence cannot be overstated, explains trauma specialist Dr. Amina Rashid. When victims are contractually prohibited from acknowledging their experiences, they often develop a form of dissociative coping that questions their own perceptions. External confirmation disrupts this pattern, reintegrating fragmented trauma narratives and demanding emotional processing that may have been suspended during survival-focused periods. For Elena, this unexpected encounter created both potential healing and immediate danger. The settlement that provided her financial stability explicitly prohibited any discussion of the poisoning, even acknowledgement that it had occurred. Daniel's recognition and his statement about Layla Al-Rashid constituted precisely the kind of interaction her NDA had been designed to prevent. If you're struck by how silence agreements effectively imprison victims in isolation with their trauma, hit that like button. These legal mechanisms deserve greater scrutiny for how they privatize justice and commodify truth itself. In the weeks following her market encounter, Elena found herself unable to maintain the compartmentalization that had allowed her functional recovery. Nightmares increased in frequency and intensity. Panic attacks returned during business hours, forcing her to close the shop unexpectedly. The locked drawer containing her ultrasound photo and smoothie residue became an obsessive focus. She checked it multiple times daily, reassuring herself that some evidence of her experience still existed. After particularly severe insomnia in early July, Elena made a decision that violated both the letter and spirit of her settlement agreement. She contacted Rosario Mendoza, an investigative journalist known for her work documenting abuses against overseas Filipino workers. Their initial meeting occurred at a remote beach resort outside Davao City, with both women taking extensive precautions to ensure privacy. "I can't tell you my story officially," Elena explained, her voice barely audible above the ocean waves. "I signed documents that would ruin me if I went public. But I need someone else to know what happened, even if nothing can be done." What followed was a 5-hour conversation during which Elena methodically detailed everything. Her relationship with Kareem, the pregnancy, Layla's reconnaissance at the perfume counter, the poisoning at Tropical Oasis, the hospital experience, and the settlement that purchased her silence. She provided the journalist with no documentation, no recordings, no physical evidence, only her testimony, shared with the explicit understanding it could never be attributed to her. Off-record disclosures serve vital psychological functions even when legal action is impossible, notes investigative ethics professor Dr. James Morrison. For victims prevented from seeking formal justice, entrusting their narrative to a professional witness represents an act of reclamation, establishing that their experience matters enough to be documented, even if never publicly acknowledged. Rosario Mendoza approached Elena's account with appropriate journalistic skepticism, neither dismissing her claims nor accepting them without verification. Over subsequent weeks, she conducted meticulous background research using public records, social media archives, and her extensive network of sources connected to OFW communities in the UAE. By August 2025, she had assembled substantial circumstantial evidence supporting Elena's account. Hospital admission records confirming her emergency treatment on November 8, 2024. Employment verification at Maison de Parfum ending abruptly that same month. Property records showing her Davao villas purchased through a shell company connected to Al Rashid family holdings. And most significantly, a buried toxicology report retrieved from American Hospital Dubai's archived records documenting aconite presence in a female patient matching Elena's profile. Most critically, Mendoza located Daniel, the former Tropical Oasis barista, who provided a sworn statement describing Layla Al-Rashid's presence at the cafe and her suspicious behavior near Elena's drink. His testimony, while hearsay from an evidentiary perspective, provided crucial corroboration from a witness with no apparent motive to fabricate such specific details. Despite this substantial documentation, formal justice remained effectively inaccessible. UAE authorities declined to reopen the investigation, citing jurisdictional limitations and statute of limitations concerns, bureaucratic language masking the reality that powerful Emirati families remained largely immune to accountability, particularly in cases involving foreign workers. Philippine authorities expressed diplomatic concern but acknowledged their limited ability to pursue justice for crimes committed outside their jurisdiction, particularly without the victim's public testimony. The silence agreement that had purchased Elena's survival now functioned precisely as designed, preventing official acknowledgement of what had occurred. This case exemplifies how wealth effectively privatizes criminal justice, explains international law expert Dr. Farida Al-Hozani. When perpetrators can afford to purchase silence through settlements that exceed lifetime earnings for victims, the public interest in addressing attempted murder becomes subordinated to private financial arrangements. The crime effectively disappears from official recognition. On September 30, 2025, however, the carefully maintained silence fractured in an unexpected manner. An anonymous user on a Filipino overseas workers forum posted a detailed account of a Filipina perfume seller in Dubai who had been poisoned by her wealthy lover's wife and subsequently paid for her silence. Though no names appeared in the post, the specificity of details, the mango passion fruit smoothie, the aconite poison, the cardiac symptoms, the miscarriage at 18 weeks, the villa in Davao, created unmistakable connections to Elena's experience. Within 48 hours, the hashtag price of a smile began trending across Filipino social media platforms. The story resonated powerfully with the approximately 2.2 million overseas Filipino workers whose labor supported the Philippine economy through remittances, but who often remained vulnerable to exploitation and abuse in their host countries. What began as a single anonymous post expanded into a broader movement, with hundreds of OFWs sharing their own experiences of silenced abuse under the same hashtag. Stories of workplace harassment, physical assaults, and various forms of exploitation resolved through private settlements rather than public justice. The hashtag Price of a Smile phenomenon demonstrates how digital platforms can create collective testimony when individual voices are contractually silenced, notes digital activism researcher Dr. Maria Santos. While Elena herself never publicly confirmed or denied the account, the story became a vehicle for broader systemic criticism about how wealthy employers weaponize NDAs against vulnerable workers. As the hashtag gained international attention, drawing coverage from major news organizations including Al Jazeera, BBC, and the Philippine Daily Inquirer, Elena maintained her public silence. She neither confirmed the account's accuracy nor denied it, continuing to operate her boutique with the careful neutrality that had characterized her post-settlement existence. This strategic non-engagement reflected both legal necessity and psychological protection. Publicly acknowledging the story would violate her NDA, potentially triggering both financial penalties and renewed attention from those who had orchestrated her poisoning. Yet private investigations revealed she had begun taking additional security precautions, installing surveillance cameras at her shop, varying her daily routines, and establishing emergency protocols with trusted neighbors. These precautions proved prescient. On October 17, 2025, Elena arrived at her boutique to find the front window shattered, interior fixtures destroyed, and merchandise ruined by chemical substances that specifically targeted her fragrance materials. Spray painted across the back wall in dark red paint that resembled blood was a chilling message. Some smiles are best forgotten. The vandalism, while investigated by local police as a standard property crime, carried unmistakable subtext for Elena. The specific phrasing, the targeted destruction of her scent materials rather than theft of valuable items, and the timing immediately following the viral spread of her story all suggested a deliberate message from those she had been paid to never mention. This form of intimidation serves multiple functions, explains security consultant Rafael Torres. Beyond the immediate property damage, it demonstrates continued surveillance capability despite geographic distance and time passage. It communicates that the victim remains monitored, that contractual silence remains enforced, and most critically, that physical safety continues to depend on compliance with established terms. For viewers disturbed by how wealth and power enable this kind of cross-continental intimidation, hit that subscribe button. These stories rarely receive mainstream attention precisely because the systems that enable them are designed to ensure silence. November 2025. The remote coastal municipality of Siquijor, Philippines, an island province known equally for its natural beauty and its folklore traditions of healing and spiritual practice. Here, in a modest bungalow overlooking the Bohol Sea, Elena Villafuerte had reconstructed her life once again, this time with greater distance from both her Dubai past and her Davao interim. The vandalism of her perfume shop had made clear the limitations of her settlement agreement, that it provided financial security but not actual safety, that compliance guaranteed nothing beyond continued payment. This recognition prompted her most significant decision since accepting the original terms: to abandon the business identity that connected her to her former life and establish something entirely new in a location known for accepting those seeking fresh beginnings. "I closed the shop because I realized I was still performing," she explained to Maricel, one of the few confidants who knew her location. "Still selling a version of myself packaged for others' consumption. Still smiling the way I was trained to smile in Dubai. I needed to stop selling altogether, fragrances, appearance, the fiction that I've moved beyond what happened." This insight that her boutique had unconsciously replicated the performance aspects of her luxury retail position represented a critical psychological breakthrough. Despite physical relocation and financial independence, she had maintained behavioral patterns established during her vulnerable employment period, continuing to construct her identity around others' expectations rather than internal authenticity. Survivors of exploitation often unconsciously recreate familiar dynamics even after achieving physical safety, explains trauma recovery specialist Dr. Anna Rivera. The performative aspects of service work, emotional labor, calibrated self-presentation, anticipating others' needs, become so deeply internalized that they persist as default patterns even when no longer externally required. Recognizing these patterns represents a crucial step toward genuine rather than superficial recovery. In Siquijor, Elena established a deliberately private existence. She purchased no property, renting instead a simple home through informal arrangements. She maintained minimal social media presence, using a variation of her middle name for limited necessary accounts. She avoided regular patterns and established relationships slowly, carefully, with significant boundaries around personal history. If you've ever wondered why victims sometimes disappear entirely rather than rebuilding their previous lives, hit that like button. The reality is that safety often requires complete dissolution of identifiable patterns that those with resources and motivation could potentially track. By December 2025, Elena had begun volunteering at Ballet Pag-asa, House of Hope, a small shelter serving returned overseas Filipino workers who had experienced trauma, exploitation, or abuse during their foreign employment. Her role involved no professional credentials or public visibility, simply practical support for women rebuilding lives after experiences that mirrored aspects of her own. She never shared her personal story, recalls Sister Maria Cristina, the nun who operated the shelter, but she brought unique understanding to women struggling with silence agreements, forced narrative compliance, and the psychological burden of maintaining employer-friendly versions of their experiences. She could speak to their reality without ever claiming first-hand knowledge. This careful navigation, offering authentic support while maintaining contractual silence, characterized Elena's evolving approach to her traumatic history. Rather than binary choices between complete denial and full disclosure, she developed nuanced methodologies for truth-sharing that honored both legal constraints and personal integrity. Most significantly, she established private rituals acknowledging aspects of her experience that settlement terms could neither regulate nor prohibit. On November 8, 2025, the first anniversary of her poisoning and pregnancy loss, she visited a secluded beach at dawn, carrying a small paper lantern containing 2 handwritten names, Baby and Truth. As sunrise illuminated the horizon, she released the lantern into the outgoing tide, watching as currents carried it beyond the reef toward open ocean. Ritualized acknowledgement serves critical healing functions when public testimony is prohibited, explains cultural anthropologist Dr. Manuel Santos. Creating symbolic representations of silenced experiences allows survivors to externalize what cannot be verbally articulated, establishing personal truth practices outside institutional constraints. It's not public justice, but it preserves internal integrity when external accountability remains inaccessible. Meanwhile, in Dubai, Kareem and Layla Al-Rashid continued their public performance of reconciled partnership. They appeared together at charity galas, business openings, and social functions, their marriage apparently strengthened by unspecified, personal challenges vaguely referenced in society publications. The philanthropic foundation established in Elena's name continued funding cardiac care for foreign workers, creating a perverse legacy where the victim's suffering generated positive publicity for her assailants. In January 2026, approximately 14 months after the poisoning, international business publications announced that Kareem Al-Rashid had accepted a leadership position with a Qatari development consortium, a move requiring relocation from Dubai to Doha. Society columns noted this career advancement while speculating about whether Layla would join him immediately or maintain her charitable foundation commitments in the UAE temporarily. What these publications couldn't capture was the private reality beneath public appearances. According to sources within Dubai's business community, the Al-Rashid's marriage had effectively collapsed despite maintained appearances. Layla had secured substantial assets through private negotiation, while Kareem had faced mounting pressure from extended family concerned about reputation management following persistent rumors about the unfortunate incident involving a former employee. His relocation to Qatar represented not career advancement but strategic retreat, accepting a slightly less prestigious position in exchange for distance from lingering questions about Elena's abrupt departure and subsequent viral story. Though never formally charged or publicly implicated, Both Kareem and Layla had discovered that even immense wealth couldn't completely erase the ripple effects of attempted murder, that whispers persisted despite legal silencing of the primary witness. The Al-Rashid's apparent success in escaping consequences represents the most common outcome when wealth confronts accountability, notes social justice advocate Layla Rahman. Yet even this dominant pattern includes subtle erosions, relationships strained by shared complicity, social capital diminished through persistent rumors, minor career compromises to escape scrutiny. These aren't justice in any meaningful sense, but they suggest limits to absolute impunity even for the extremely privileged. For Elena, news of the Al-Rashid's changing circumstances carried minimal significance. Her focus had narrowed to present reconstruction rather than past accountability, building daily routines centered on personal authenticity rather than performance, establishing relationships characterized by mutual support rather than transactional exchange, reclaiming agency within the constraints that wealth had imposed upon her. In February 2026, a significant development unexpectedly expanded these constraints. While visiting the shelter, Elena encountered a newly arrived resident, a young woman named Fatima who had recently returned from Dubai after experiencing what shelter staff described as employment difficulties. Though initially reserved, Fatima gradually revealed that she had worked as a laundry aide in a private Emirati household, specifically the Al-Rashid villa. This connection, this living link to the environment where Elena's trauma had originated, created both potential danger and unexpected healing opportunity. Through careful conversation that never explicitly identified her own experience, Elena learned crucial information: that the Al-Rashid's marriage had deteriorated into separate bedrooms and public pretense, that staff turnover had increased dramatically after a foreign worker got sick, that Kareem's departure for Qatar had been preceded by family interventions regarding inappropriate relationships. Most significantly, Elena learned that Layla had reportedly suffered increasing paranoia, installing additional security cameras throughout the villa, requiring staff to submit to random drug testing, personally inspecting food preparation, and experiencing episodes of uncontrolled rage when routine expectations weren't perfectly met. Sometimes justice doesn't come through courts or public accountability, reflects restorative justice practitioner Dr. Samira Khan. Sometimes it manifests as the psychological consequences perpetrators experience, even when externally protected from formal consequences, the paranoia, relationship deterioration, and damaged professional standing that follow serious wrongdoing, even when officially unacknowledged. This information, that her poisoner was experiencing her own form of psychological imprisonment, provided Elena unexpected closure. Without seeking revenge or celebrating another's suffering, she found capacity to recognize that Layla's apparent victory had transformed into its own form of confinement, that purchasing silence hadn't secured peace for either victim or perpetrator. By April 2026, Elena had established a new daily rhythm entirely different from her Dubai performance or her Davos replication. She abandoned commercial employment entirely, supporting herself through the settlement funds while focusing on shelter volunteering and developing her own garden of medicinal plants, ironically, including carefully contained aconite whose properties she had researched extensively following her poisoning. Understanding the substance that nearly killed me became essential to reclaiming control, she explained to a trusted medical herbalist who supervised her garden. Not to use against others, but to transform from weapon to knowledge. I needed to understand exactly what happened to my body, to my baby, to my future. Knowledge dismantles fear, even when justice remains inaccessible. This transformation of poison into knowledge represented Elena's most profound recovery methodology, converting instruments of harm into resources for healing, not through forgiveness or forgetting, but through intellectual mastery that reduced their power to create ongoing fear. A particularly meaningful development occurred in May 2026 when Elena adopted a stray dog she discovered near her bungalow, an undernourished female mixed breed with evident signs of previous mistreatment. She named the dog Hope, not with naive optimism but with deliberate recognition that survival itself constitutes resistance when systems are designed for erasure. The relationship between Elena and this rescued animal reveals profound recovery symbolism, notes trauma-informed veterinarian Dr. Rafael Cruz, who treated Hope's initial medical needs. Both had experienced exploitation by those with power over their welfare. Both carried physical and psychological scars requiring ongoing management rather than complete resolution. Both had been discarded when no longer serving others' purposes. Their mutual healing journey represents interspecies recognition of shared vulnerability transformed into reciprocal care. On the morning of November 8, 2026, the second anniversary of her poisoning, a young woman arrived at Ballet Pagasa seeking assistance. Recently returned from domestic work in Kuwait, she appeared physically depleted and emotionally withdrawn. As Elena helped settle her into the shelter's intake process, the woman asked an unexpected question. "Did you ever work abroad?" Elena paused, considering how to navigate this seemingly simple inquiry that intersected directly with her NDA restrictions. After a moment, she answered with careful authenticity that honored both legal constraints and personal integrity. "Yes," she replied softly, "and I learned that your smile belongs to you, not your employer, not your lover, not your pain. It's the one thing they can't actually purchase, even when everything else is for sale." Later that afternoon, Elena conducted what had become her most meaningful regular activity at the shelter, teaching returned workers to create their own personal fragrances using locally available botanicals. For this particular young woman, she demonstrated her signature blend: bergamot for resilience, vetiver for grounding, and a single drop of salt water for the tears you're not allowed to shed. As the woman inhaled the completed fragrance, her expression shifted, subtle relaxation replacing vigilant tension, momentary presence displacing traumatic preoccupation. Not healing exactly, not yet, but perhaps its precursor. The recognition that reclaiming sensory pleasure represents revolutionary act when systems of exploitation require anesthetic disconnection from one's own bodily experience. In contexts where justice remains systemically inaccessible, reflects social ethicist Dr. Elena Reyes, healing necessarily expands beyond legal accountability to encompass reclamation practices that power cannot regulate. The most radical act becomes not public testimony but private reconstitution, rebuilding relationship with one's authentic self when performance has been the price of survival. Not justice, perhaps, but genuine resistance nonetheless. For Elena Villafuerte, this resistance manifested not as dramatic confrontation but as quiet reclamation of authentic expression, of selective vulnerability, of capacity for connection despite traumatic betrayal. The settlement had purchased her public silence but not her private truth. The poisoning had taken her child, her cardiac health, her professional identity, but not her fundamental agency to determine what meaning she assigned to her own experience. In Dubai and Doha, the Al-Rashids continued their separate lives, physically distant, reputationally damaged, but legally protected from consequences commensurate with their actions. They had effectively purchased impunity through financial resources unavailable to most perpetrators, demonstrating the persistent correlation between wealth and accountability avoidance in systems designed to protect established interests. Yet even this apparent victory carried limitations they hadn't anticipated. Layla's charitable foundation faced declining donor participation following persistent rumors about her personal conduct. Karim's Qatari position offered less authority than his previous role despite higher compensation. Their social invitations decreased in frequency and prestige as subtle distancing occurred among peers who never explicitly referenced the unfortunate situation, but recognized its implications for association risk. Not justice, not even close to proportional consequences for attempted murder, but perhaps evidence that absolute impunity remains elusive even within systems designed to facilitate it. That truth possesses resilience beyond institutional containment. That silenced voices sometimes find unexpected amplification through channels power cannot anticipate or control. For viewers disturbed by the incompleteness of this resolution, remember that true crime documentaries typically end with either justice served or injustice explicitly acknowledged. Elena's story offers neither, reflecting instead the reality faced by countless victims whose experiences occur at intersections of power differentials that make conventional resolution effectively impossible. If her story has affected you, please share it with others who need to understand these dynamics. Leave a comment with your thoughts about how silence agreements shape trauma recovery. Because as long as there are those willing to listen, the stories of the silenced will continue finding voice, not always through conventional justice, but through the collective witness that ensures their experiences remain visible despite systems designed for erasure.